whack-a-mole style sanctions are going to speed things along. Yes, please.
So the European regulations, the right to privacy, seem radical from the point of view of the U.S. It'd be hard to imagine that passing, but I'm curious what you think the implications will be in Europe, where already, people are concerned about the lack of innovation there to begin with. Will that have any consequences?
So there's a very popular refrain that an increase in privacy will stifle innovation. But this is orthodoxical, and it has a strong economic interest behind it, and the entire concept of innovation is really, really hazy.
Yes.
So it's a refrain that needs to be deconstructed if not destroyed. And so Europe's comparative position with respect to innovation, taken broadly, is going to be a function of many factors. One of them is that they don't have they don't have anywhere near the same type of VC investment infrastructure that America does. But also, we're not the same in terms of economic size. They're a completely different shape of political arrangement. Europe is, and I would potentially get spitballed for this, a quasi-federalist arrangement. Some of the things look more federal, some of them just look supranational and confederational. And so ultimately, I am unconvinced by the idea that increases in privacy and data protection arrangements will stifle innovation.
Well, could you make the other argument that they will be forced to innovate in new and interesting directions?
I think that's true generally. I don't think that's particular to Europe. Basically, any additional regulatory cost that is levied against a business either here or in India or in Europe will ultimately figure out a way to go around it. Capitalism is like a river. Throw a rock into it and it's just going to go right around it. Yes?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for this brilliant talk. And I have a few questions for you. The first one is regarding private regulation, or what we call private ordering, which is basically standard for contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So take it or leave it contracts you mentioned. So maybe it's just my idea, but I think that in the absence of regulation, governmental regulation, we just see more and more contracts.
Right.
So if you won't regulate, we're going to see that. So I wonder how that comes into play in your, thinking about IoT specifically, because this is a major shift when we, switch from the regular interfaces inside IoT. So for example, the GDPR you mentioned, they require a lot of, disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
They require specific consent on the gathering of information. How are we going to do that in the IoT setting? So this is the first question. Second, I hear a lot of, I truly understand the harm and the risk, but what about the benefit? What about using all of this data for social justice? How can we create an area where IoT's privacy or security concerns are not only viewed as a bad thing? Maybe we can, introduce some better utilization of all of this information. So I would be curious to hear your view on that.
Sure. And so if I understand it, your first question is about how do we deal with notice in an IoT world?
Specifically, from the talk, I understand there is a great debate about when to intervene in the market. After we see the evidence regarding the harm, etc., or before, or how do we explore that?
Yep.
But we have to realize that if we don't create regulation, this doesn't mean we don't have at place private ordering, whether it's, legal, like contracts,
Yep.
or technology-based regulations. Yeah. So I feel like it's not whether there will be regulation or not, it's who dictates the regulation, whether it's us, the regulators, or the law,
Yep.
or private entities.
Yes, no, I agree.
And this is a big concern, I think, in IoT specifically.
Well, I agree with you that the idea that essentially is that, if you're not governed by the government, you're governed by the market, or you're governed by other actors, you're always governed, period. And so, the idea, contracts are neutral containers. And so what you pour into them is dependent on a variety of different forces and needs and negotiations and reasons. And so contracts don't necessarily yield more privacy. If you pour privacy into, the contract, why are you doing it?
They do exactly the opposite. They make the user, like you mentioned, decide whether to take it or leave it, and if they opt in and they can't opt out the IoT setting, they kind of consent to everything. So I think they...
Yeah, so I don't think that the mere existence of contracts or the existence of private regulation necessarily confers any benefits or goes one way or the other. I mean, in contracts, in the absence of some form of social pressure, will follow market logic. And so that includes things like, making sure the other, if I'm contracting with another company, I want to make sure that they meet their representations, they do the thing that they told me that they were going to do, and that I can sue the hell out of them if something goes wrong.
But isn't this the exact argument for why we need more regulation? I mean, governmental-based...
I think so. Yeah, no, I mean, that's the idea of privacy as social policy is that there's a role for the social regulator to come in and to imbue these markets with values, when those values can often manifest as constraints on economic behavior. I personally would like to see that, because I do not believe that ultimately privacy will be, the privacy values that I personally cherish, I don't think the market is going to champion. And your second question was
regarding using IoT and data, in general, the collection of data for social justice purposes.
And that'll happen. That'll happen. There's no reason why that won't happen. And I don't think that being strong on privacy is going to harm that at all. Ultimately, so think about consent. Part of the problem with consent is that it is binary, take it or leave it. And at the moment, you actually even don't have a withdrawal mechanism. And so that's really not meaningful consent. But imagine a world where you had a Fitbit and you could tell Fitbit, you are okay to use my data in IRB-approved research, but you can't market to me, you can't use it for product, evolution, et cetera, et cetera. So you can only do, here's a menu of 12 things that that you've listed about what can be done with the data, and I'm only choosing this one. That's granularity that doesn't exist in the current world with respect to consent. It's not because there's a natural reason why it can't, it's because there's a business reason why it doesn't exist, because it's not in their interest to create such structures. So as far as the social value of this data, I believe it can exist. The original big data is epidemiology. So I am perfectly content with the idea of all of these new whiz-bang devices being used to enhance the utility and glory of the human race. But I see no reason whatsoever to put privacy values on hold in favor of that, nor am I in favor of market actors telling us what is socially valuable and therefore how their regulation should be constrained. Yes?
I was wondering if you heard of the all-join framework.
Yep.
So for everybody who's not familiar with it, it's basically an open source software framework that enables IoT device producers from different manufacturers to basically create devices that can talk to each other. And so it's kind of like a consortium, you get certified, there's a level of agreement. I wonder if you've seen a trend towards doing something similar with regards to privacy standards for IoT, and if you think something like all-join kind of expanding into that space would be a good or a bad thing.
Yeah, so absolutely. And what you're describing is the concept of platforms. So within IoT, there's this idea that essentially if you can imagine a middle layer, a middleware, a common framework that sits, if individual drones and Fitbits and cars are endpoints, there's a connective tissue beneath that. Maybe then some rules, and then on the other end are first and third parties who want access to the data and the human beings themselves. So if you imagine there's this connective tissue that's based on proprietary standards or open standards that are the point of this middle layer is to essentially provide services to and from the devices and what's on the other side. And so my view is that that is a very interesting site of privacy intervention, because you can do policy enforcement. So a company like Salesforce.com, which is enormous at this point, and they very much want to be big in the IoT space. And so if you imagine you've got umpteen third parties hanging off of one end of Salesforce, and on the other side, you have a fleet of IoT devices, wearables or cars or semi-sentient vacuum cleaners, whatever. The concentration point of these platforms is leverage, and it gives the ability for the whoever is controlling that middle layer to enforce privacy policies, and so they themselves can be norm entrepreneurs. They have the ability to basically, through contract, require privacy architecture, structures, and behavior. So that is a very important site. These are you can call them intermediaries, but I think that it's better to consider them as platforms because they're not just neutral pass-throughs. They are providing services up and down in their environment. Yes?
Thanks for taking a question from the floor.
Of course.
One of the many questions. For me anyway. So you used both in your title and your last slide and in your domain name the word privacy. Now, one of the opportunities from a various point of view for the Internet of Things is attacking safety. Physical safety of you, yours, and physical property, which really hasn't arisen so much in online interaction. Do you have any comments about how that is that just a derivative? I wouldn't think it's a pure derivative from security or privacy safety concerns that we've addressed, say, even in the financial realm. But it's not too much of an extrapolation to go from resonances in centrifuges in Mesopotamia to garbage disposals that are coordinated with phishing attacks to get you to put your hand.
Yes, I mean,
on and on and on and on. Or a thermostat that doesn't just do the set point, but it actually turns the valve on.
Certainly. I mean, there's one of the new terms du jour of this space is cyber-physical systems, and so but that is a term coming out of engineering and critical infrastructure considerations and NIST. Much hand-wringing happens over the concept of critical infrastructure and the vulnerability of IoT devices. And so, yeah, that is, I think that at this stage, because the Internet of Things, A, is an incredibly hazy idea, and B, it's very young, that sort of, threats to life and limb are perhaps exaggerated at this point. We will see things over time. I mean, at the same time, you have the DIN attack. And so there was last year a major DDoS attack that was based on IoT devices, because don't forget, these devices are computers. They happen to live in a fridge or a car or on your wrist. But they're lacking screens, they're lacking keyboards, they're lacking bits and pieces here and there. But imagine how much computation was in your Palm Pilot, and now that is living in something this big. And so, ultimately, from an infrastructural protection perspective, yeah, there's going to be issues. And so, we had a workshop yesterday about a lot of these topics, and Ashkan Sultani was there, and he's a security researcher on these topics, and he made the point that, if you buy a smart fridge, that is a $1,000 fridge with a $5 IoT component. And so, are they going to update it? Are they going to patch it? Or if it's the point he makes also is you have a $10 IoT light bulb that does all kinds of cool things. Are they going to patch that? $10 product? No. This is a major topic of discussion, is the patchability, upgradability, security, vulnerability aspects of these devices. We have not seen apocalyptic things happen yet, but certainly.
It doesn't have to be general apocalypse.
No, it's true. It doesn't have to be general apocalypse, and so we haven't, and look, more stories will happen where things will, where a culprit may be the $10 light bulb. It's certainly true. The insecurity of, if you imagine that, how insecure your computer is, and now all these computers are proliferating into physical spaces, then yeah, I'm sure that amplifies the problem quite a bit.
Anyway, I'd make a pitch for safety, privacy, and security. It gives you the triple
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in favor of all three of those myself. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in terms of regulation, where you see do you see sort of regulation coming in specific areas or something that is broader, and which institution in existence or maybe that needs to be created would be best suited to implement regulation in this space?
I really don't see a lot of regulation coming. I see a lot of best practice enforcement. I think that you'll continue to see a reliance upon the public promise and therefore opening up your business to Title V violations of the FTC on the U.S. side. But I ultimately don't. And the problem is because it's like, you know, if the IoT term is going away, why? It's because it's just technology. These are continuations of existing product trends. And so there's no way to look at this from a top level of a generic concept of an IoT, because, you know, the governance and regulatory structures that the car, super regulated already. Toys, not so much. They're supposed to not kill children and burst into flames. You know, and the thing is, do you think that there will be any kind of regulation for teddy bears? Where would it come from? It just, no. Ultimately, and plus there are broad trends within the American regulatory environment that are in favor of neoliberal ideas of the deregulation of the state in favor of lighter touch regulation, and there was already a light touch to begin with. There's a heavy, heavy reliance on litigation versus other types of interventions, and it just doesn't seem to be going. The FTC has had its power limited, not increased. We've already heard that the FCC is putting the brakes on its privacy rules, and so the current president and his administration are really going to just amplify long-term trends with in keeping regulation as light a touch as possible. I don't see it happening. The GDPR is the newest and most interesting thing around. You know, it's not just you ask 10 people, you get 15 different answers about, you know, is it just hand waving or is it meaningful? And so, but look, 4% of annual turnover gets people to wake up, you know, and but you get back into the question of whether what is the reach of regulators, of enforcers, how much enforcement can actually happen, and so. You know, are regulators starved intentionally? You know, how do regulators make their money? I think it's the Italian DPA that makes their money by fining. And so, you know, they're going to be a bit more aggressive than the UK ICO, which gets its money from the state, you know, less and less. So I don't see trends. You know, the one, like I said, the data breach notification, that might be a place because that is a naming and shaming tactic that actually does something, but it's a generic regulatory change or amplification. This is not an IoT specific one. I do not think you will see, with the exception of a few things like that Montana law. So there's something like 17 states have vehicle black box laws on the books, and 3 of them are somewhat attractive to me. So in theory, you know, engaging with the other states that don't have these laws yet and putting good things before them and asking, you know, working with legislators to redline bills that have ugly provisions in them and in fact push them towards the good is one of the ways to do that, is to get out there and to you know, offer your brains to the staffers of legislators in different states. Yes.
So something you haven't talked about very much or at all, I think, is how to respond to a situation where the developer, the manufacturer of the IoT device is not just careless or sloppy with things, but actually working actively to undermine the obvious example is Volkswagen's cars.
Oh yeah.
But I'm sure there are other examples of that. There seems to be quite a lot in the car industry. It's just
Well, there's the Uber active grayballing program, which just happened.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But that's, I mean, sorry, go on.
So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that, and particularly how one can respond to that situation, because that seems to be even more difficult to detect than a situation where you just have poor security. Were you a company that's actually actively working to undermine the regulatory framework?
Bad press and, you know, pressing all of the incredibly indirect and diffuse levers to improve the regulatory state. Those are your options, you know. raising holy hell in any mechanism that's available to you, but our, as plebs, our power is limited. Yes?
Right, so on this side, suppose we turn it around, and suppose, I'm thinking about a quote from Sandy Packard at MIT, who says, if you have reputation mechanisms that were trusted, you could replace a lot of licensing regulation. Now, is the internet mature enough? Are the networks and blockchain and our interconnectivity such that we could actually have a sort of overarching reputation mechanism or system?
No.
No, it's early days.
No, I think that's totally not possible. It just doesn't make any sense. If you can show me any evidence of it whatsoever in the world as it exists today, then I would take it under advisement. But reputation is an incredibly weak method to constrain market behavior. Volkswagen, they're still selling cars. They're cool, and they did something naughty, but they ain't going anywhere. Toyota, this issue, the TalkTalk breach in the UK, and Uber deliberately, hiding from regulators. The idea of market punishment is, really waffly. To imagine that there are, economic punitive measures that actually shape behavior in the market is unconvincing in a lot of ways. And so I don't believe that reputation is an effective way of shaping the behavior of actors. I'm waiting to see good evidence. Yeah.
Last question.
Okay, last question.
So, from the GDPR, I feel like the EU is the closest to embracing privacy as social policy, but like you explained, there are so many market behavior issues and structural issues that prevent the US from embracing privacy and the public interest in it and legislating in the interests of that. And I understand why you're skeptical of regulation, but if we're to advance privacy as a social policy meaningfully in America, and you think that regulation is not likely to come from that, how do we do that?
That's a great question, and I will say here that I am not trained as a lawyer, and so court processes are a bit opaque to me. And so I'm not clear as to how judges come to channel social expectations. To me, they don't seem to be sociologists, but they seem to try to put themselves in the role of one. But I don't understand how that happens over time. And so, unfortunately, an institutional arrangement perspective, it's not the GDPR that gives Europe the privacy as social policy, it is the European Union treaties that do that, by building it in. At the same time, there are some US states that have privacy as a component of their state constitution, and so does that create more rights. I am very much, attracted to the amplification of a rights perspective as much as possible, because rights mean you don't have to explain yourself. So it's, there will be bad press. There will be, ugly events that will, cause companies to stumble. And I think that you need to sort of pick your battles. For me, I see the child surveillance issue as being a really good one, because if you say to adults you're losing your privacy, you get that's all right, I've got the shiny. But if you say it's about kids losing their privacy, the think of the children motif kicks in, and there's perhaps a little bit more purchase there. So it's a thorny question, and so because your question implicates how does social policy get made, and again, diffuse long-term sausage making there. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gilad, for coming to speak.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Got around it. That's terrific.
Thank you so much.
It's really good. You're a very great speaker. Also, it's very clear, and you sorted the issues in a very methodical way. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing your work continue.
Thank you.
I just want to say, what a brilliant talk.
Thank you.
I wonder what you think about. So I'm in this area of private ordering in IP, and there we really see how